Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is an ink of lies. Or at least the name is, anyway. It's Diamine, quote-unquote dark green. And actually, the camera is just turning it green. This is actually, it has hints of aqua in it, it's kind of sea foamy. But it is not dark anything. Yep, Diamine has a like dark brown is definitely not dark brown. Dark green definitely ain't dark green. Now, the camera is doing some weird stuff, so just to let you know ahead of time, if things around it look odd, it's because I've adjusted the color or filter or whatever so that this looks as accurate to reality as possible, so that might mean things around it are a little funky looking. But yeah, it was all about making the ink as accurate as possible. But yeah, so 2 pens were these. This is a Parker Vector with a fine nib, but actually for some reason this ink was running pretty wet in here. And I don't know why, but just to let you know, it's usually pretty moderate. Which is common because if you see these nibs, first of all, they're very small, and the slit between the tines is usually so tight that it's hard to see through it at all. So, yeah. And then I also use this pen and ink sketch with a broad nib for some contrast. And this one is actually, for a broad nib, fairly moderate. Okay, so there's that. Let's look at some comparables, and the truth is, I didn't have a lot of comparables for this because it's fairly unique. It is green with some hints of aqua. So, yeah. Here's Diamine Dark Green. DC Super Show Green, which is actually quite similar. The only really different bit is through here and some of, I don't know what you call it, the shady areas. It turns a bit more green. Parker Quint Green, which is also very aqua-ish. It's actually quite similar, but maybe a bit darker. Ironic. Here's Diamine Soft Mint, which is definitely more of like a menthol kind of a color, but it's blue with hints of green, so in that regard, very similar, but this is much lighter. And Toucan Aqua, which is and isn't similar, as you might be able to tell. Of course, I don't know after the color fixing, but it has these very distinct areas of green and then some very distinct areas of blue. But if you sort of took the medium of that and made it a little darker, it'd look like this. So, yeah, not much that looks quite like this ink. Now, let's check out the chromatography. Here's how you're supposed to do the chromatography. And you can barely tell where I put the initial drop, and if you can, it's a trick of the light because it's lines from the nib moving on the paper. So those are indents. They're not actually, like, gray. And yeah, there's just a big old blank space, and then it goes sort of light, and then it just gets darker, but yeah, it flees from water. And then here's where I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, admittedly. But here you can sort of see just a barest little hint right where it starts and moving up, and then it's mostly the same, but up at the top, it's maybe not as dark. So yeah, there you go. Wanted to see what this ink could sort of hold its own against, and the answer is not much. Actually, despite what this shows right here, this ink is very, very water soluble. It was incredibly easy to clean out of my pens, which I was kind of thankful for because... Moving on. Here's the 1/3 bleach solution. You can see it really got rid of it. In fact, I don't even know why that stuff in the middle remained. But yeah, you can barely tell it's there. It was over there. The ammonia pen flush really got it moving. If for some reason water didn't work, ammonia pen flush would probably be a good idea. I do not advocate cleaning out your pens with hydrogen peroxide. Ever. But, yeah, that really broke it up, which was interesting. So yeah. On to the paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Yep. It is not dark green, even remotely. In fact, it's a little thin. It can be a little watery looking in some places, like these places, all through here. Yeah, I would really like this ink if it were much more saturated. I mean, here, even at the darkest parts where I was really laying it on, you can still see that line from the paper. Now, this fine, you can tell that it was running wet, because look, that smear is actually technically longer than that of the broad. You do get some shading. That is an advantage of thinner or less saturated inks. They tend to give you a wide breadth of shading. So there's that, if you're really into that. Water test, kind of what I would have predicted. If anything remained, it was the dots, particularly from the broad. But the words are really, really gone. Dyed the page just a little bit, but it is really, really gone. Next up is Fabriano, 85 grams per square meter. Yeah, exactly, sort of continuing on the same thing. There's shading. There's a good bit of shading. That fine took 17 seconds to dry because it was just running oddly wet. And the broad took 19. We do get a little bit of a halo effect here in the wettest parts. See that dark outline? Which I like, personally. Yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Same on here, none of that. So, very well behaved in that regard. And again, more of the same. The dots from the broad really remain, and everything else is utterly gone. Yeah, so not a lot of water resistance. But Diamine isn't really known for it, so whatever. Up next is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. Again, we get a very broad breadth of shading, but this ink looks really thin. I mean, even here, through the darkest parts, you can see every single line of this quadrilateral paper. It looks a little undersaturated. I'd like at least just a little bit more ink in this ink. But anyways, that fine, because it was running wet, took 13 seconds to dry. The broad took 19 once again. Well behaved in that there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. That's great. But the water test, again, oh, stop freaking out, camera, please. Yeah, as you can see, the dots really remain, especially the broad ones, and then you just get these like little bits and hints of the writing. That would not be fun or easy to try and recover. Next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times, which it kind of did, but not even a whole lot. So that fine took 15, the broad took 21. You do get a good breadth of shading, but there is no sheen. There is no sheen, and I laid it on pretty thick trying to get some sheen, but there wasn't any. We do get a nice halo effect around the wettest parts. See that dark outline? Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, it's, if you like this color, if you like a lot of shading, you know, go for it. It's, there's nothing wrong with this ink at all. I don't like that the name is misleading, and I wish there was a little bit more ink in it. It's a perfectly good ink. Honestly, the color just doesn't really speak to me. That's about it. It's that simple, personal, nothing else. But yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no sheen. I don't even think there's any echo, which says something about how light this ink is. I mean, maybe, no, not even. Not even the scrubby where I was laying it on, nothing. Now this paper does love to let ink slide away when you add more water, and it really, really did. There are the dots from the broad and pretty much nothing else. So yeah. Okay, so next 3 tests. I only use the Parker Vector except to write the name. And here is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper, where it is definitely going to earn that title, because look at this spread. Compare this to this. Honestly, it looks more like the broad. It got much, much larger. And we have no shading left whatsoever. It does take on a bit of a woolly effect. However, the actual performance isn't so bad. We don't see a lot of feathering. In fact, we see almost none. It's just more of a woolly texture. That's quite nice. 1.5 seconds to dry. We do get a lot of this stuff. But, you know, I mean, how sensitive are you to it? And again, it was running weirdly wet in that vector, even though it was a fine. You'll probably get better results than this, just by the fact that you probably have at least one step up from world's worst copier paper. Now, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in. It makes it harder to wash out. And that is kind of what we've got here. You can see more remains. Look at how the paper freaked out. More remains, but it starts to feather and explode, and some of it does wash away, so it gets a bit lighter. But I mean, it depends on how motivated you are, but if you absolutely had to recover that, you probably could. Next up is Mead Notebook Paper. It's physically thinner than 20 pound. It's very common for American school children. Here, we don't get nearly as much spread. See how the line width, essentially we got no spread. We got essentially no spread, which is nice. However, lately, and this test is actually, it's from a little bit ago, so it's before I noticed the trend of the feathering on here. There is some feathering, but oddly, not nearly as much as we've seen in the time since. Just a little bit, like the H in thin. See, it's not even that easy to get on camera. It's sort of more of a, oh, the first E in bleeding. Just that, just a little bit. 2 seconds to dry, no shading. The color is very bright, vibrant. We have no bleed whatsoever. We have very little echo, and if we do, it's in that scrubby. Excellent combination, despite the fact that it was running really wet in this pen. Those pens are actually very common for school children, so this could be a good combination right here. However, the water test is probably not ideal. Some remains. It does get lighter, it does explode a little bit, but yeah, if you had to recover that, if you're motivated enough, you could. Wow, my camera's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Anyways, lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, which I hate because it hates ink. And the thing is, it actually didn't do as badly as we often see. It did get a little woolly here, but if we bring it in, yeah, we get some woolliness and we get some feathering. Like you see the bottom of the I and the C in quick, bottom of the E and the. It's just a little. I mean, compared to Moleskine tests we've seen just this week. Oh my God, Giacomo Puccini, that one freaked out. Oh geez. But yeah, it took 5 seconds to dry, which is a little surprising because obviously it's pretty absorbent. But we don't really get any bleed. We get some little dots that kind of want to come through, but considering how much you have to pay for this paper, I wouldn't blame you if you wrote on both sides, and here it really wouldn't be so bad. And again, that was a European fine. Vectors are European. And it was running pretty wet, so could be a lot worse. It's not perfect, but it could be a heck of a lot worse. Now, here's the water test. Camera, stop freaking out for 5 seconds. It didn't dye the page, like, at all, but it did, it's like a double down on feathering. And actually a good bit of it washed away. See, like part of the R, part of the E, top of the A, middle of the T, most of the, it's weird, right? That's kind of odd. And that's where it came through the back, but I mean, that's a water test, so, yeah. Anyways, there you go, for your consideration. Diamine's quote-unquote dark green. It is not dark, and it's actually not entirely green. It's definitely got some sea foaminess to it. It's got an aqua lean. But yeah, shades a lot, because I'd say it's just on this side of undersaturated. Doesn't sheen, but, you know, like I said, lots of shading. So if you like this color, if you want lots of shading, if you want it to be actually comparatively well-behaved on cheaper papers, maybe look into it. Yeah. Anyways, there you go, for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.